Japan just signed the biggest wheat deal of the year, but not with the US. They chose Canada, and for the first time in nearly 40 years, America was officially left out of the negotiation table. This isn't just about exports anymore. It's a blunt message to the world the United States is no longer the global food supplier it once was. As US wheat gets rejected, farmers are forced to sell their land, and everyday Americans are left eating overpriced, lower-quality imported bread. A nation once proud to say it could feed the world is now asking itself, what do we even have left to hold on to? If you think this doesn't affect you, stick around until the end of this video, because tomorrow's loaf of bread on your table might no longer be made from American wheat. Canada-Japan, wheat deal, no room left for the US. Some announcements never make it to primetime news. You won't see them dissected by experts on TV, but they carry enough weight to bring an entire industry to its knees. In early July, Canada's Ministry of Agriculture quietly posted a short update. Tokyo and Ottawa have agreed on a 3-year partnership for a strategic food-grade wheat supply chain, securing at least 95% of Japan's import needs. The United States wasn't mentioned, not a single line for its longtime ally. To the average consumer, it may sound like just another trade update, but for farmers in Kansas, South Dakota, or Montana, it hit like a gut punch. Japan had been the most stable export market for American wheat, importing nearly 2 million tons a year, mostly high-quality hard red spring wheat, the kind only certain US regions can grow. For decades, America wasn't just a supplier. It set the standard for wheat across Asia. But Japan suddenly switching to Canada wasn't just a business decision. It was a cold statement. We're no longer betting on the US. This isn't just a trade contract, it's a turning point. A loud, clear signal that the United States is no longer the world's first choice for essential food supplies. The real question isn't, why did Japan choose Canada? It's, how did the US lose a market that was once untouchable? The truth is, this didn't happen overnight. Since 2021, when global supply chains started breaking down after the pandemic, Canada began quietly laying the groundwork, negotiating with Asian nations, upgrading infrastructure, and most importantly, keeping its promises. Shipments from Saskatchewan arrived in Tokyo on time with consistent quality and transparent pricing. Meanwhile, US wheat started falling behind. Japan had reached out to the US 3 separate times asking for a long-term supply plan. After 2023, they stopped getting any clear response. One Japanese agricultural official put it bluntly, "We need a partner who delivers on time, not one held hostage by internal chaos." He didn't name names, but everyone knew who he meant. For American farmers, it's not just about losing a contract. It's the heartbreak of being left behind, replaced by a country that used to be considered the backup plan. In Montana, some farmers shared their frustration. "We poured hundreds of thousands into high-grade seeds just for Japan. Now we're selling it off cheap because no one's buying." The issue isn't Canada doing something wrong, it's that the US, despite having the land, the legacy, and the trust, somehow let it all slip away, quietly, and the silence from those in charge only makes things worse. No explanation, no new strategy. No plan to protect farmers. Just vague press releases filled with empty phrases like monitoring the situation, domestic prioritization, and global market adjustment. But in the Great Plains, nobody wants another report. They need buyers for the grain they borrowed money to plant. They need reliable contracts to survive the next season. And more than anything, they need to be heard not by academics, but by decision makers. What's ironic is that wheat isn't a luxury product. It's the backbone of everyday meals, from a cheap loaf of supermarket bread to school lunches. Losing control over the wheat supply chain isn't just an export issue. It's a crack in our domestic food system. Because when a nation loses its leadership in food dependency, it creeps silently into every corner of life. And losing Japan isn't just about one country. It sets off a chain reaction. South Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia nations that used to prioritize US wheat for its quality and diplomatic ties are now shifting toward Canada, Australia, and even Central Asia. Back home, US buyers are scaling back too as export markets shrink. This loop is choking American farmers not because they've done something wrong, but because there's no longer a market to survive on. Trade analysts had warned back in late 2024. If the US doesn't reestablish its agricultural export strength soon, it will lose markets permanently. That warning has become reality, and Canada, with its clear strategy, is stepping right into the gaps America left open. Some may try to brush it off. Markets go in cycles, but farmers don't borrow money to wait 3 years. A lost harvest means a total loss. And once the land is abandoned, once the combines are parked, there's nothing left to rotate. If one contract can shift the balance of global wheat trade, we have to ask how many other deals are slipping through our fingers without us even noticing. And if Canada, with harsh winters and just a tenth of our population, can become Japan's top choice, what exactly is holding the US back? Maybe it's not about land. Or yield. Maybe it's about something deeper, the ability to keep our promises and follow through on the commitments we once made. Because for a country that once fed the world, the greatest loss isn't the contract, it's the trust. When Americans eat bread made from Canadian wheat, not everyone cares about wheat exports, but everyone has to eat. And when a nation loses the market it once dominated, the consequences don't just show up in trade reports. They quietly find their way into everyday meals. In New Jersey, a loaf of plain white sandwich bread that used to cost $2.29 earlier this year now goes for $3.19. In Minnesota, supermarkets, the familiar all-American flour labels have been replaced by fine print on the back, imported wheat blend, product of Canada and US. Most shoppers don't notice, but they feel something's off, something just doesn't taste like it used to. And they're right. More and more meals in America are now made with wheat grown in another country. It started with losing international markets, but it spread like dominoes. When America stopped exporting like before, local processing plants had to cut back. Contracts were canceled. Farmers lost their buyers. They planted less. Some stopped planting altogether. Lower output forced food companies to start importing. The result, Americans in the heart of their own country are now eating bread made from wheat that no longer grows on American soil. At a food factory in Iowa, a production director told the local press, "We used to have 3-year wheat contracts with farmers in the state, but with rising logistics costs and inconsistent domestic supply, we had to switch to imports from Canada and Ukraine. That shift wasn't just a business call, it broke the chain of trust between growers, processors, and consumers. When Midwest farmers get pushed out of the value chain, they don't just lose income, they lose their place in the community they've supported for generations. Picture a family of 4 in the Midwest. They used to take pride in eating local bread cereal crackers, all made from wheat grown just miles away. Today it all comes from somewhere else. Not because they chose it, but because prices keep climbing and origins keep getting more distant. And in that shift, a quiet sense of helplessness creeps in. How does a country with 400 million acres of farmland end up buying back the very crop it once fed the world with? A farmer from Nebraska told a local paper, "I've been growing wheat for 32 years. Now I see the shelves at Walmart and they're no longer stocked with our wheat." What hurts more is that no one even asks why. No disaster happened overnight. It's been slow and silent, grain elevators shutting down contracts pulled with no explanation, crop subsidies delayed or too small to matter. Eventually, those who once worked the land are forced to stand by, while foreign grain fills domestic warehouses. To consumers, this change shows up on a receipt. To farmers, it feels like an unspoken goodbye between them and the land they once thought would feed their families forever. This breakdown in the value chain doesn't stop at wheat and bread. It spills into meat, eggs, and dairy too, because when wheat prices go up, so do feed costs. A frozen baked goods plant in Ohio raised prices by 12% in Q2, simply because they had to import ingredients from Canada instead of buying local. Worse yet, they also announced the suspension of 2 product lines made with hard red winter wheat, a variety the US once led the world in producing but now can't supply reliably. At budget grocery chains in Missouri, packaged pasta recipes had to be changed. Domestic flour prices were too high to maintain the 0.9 per box standard, and so the story repeats: big brands tweak their formulas, source cheaper wheat from abroad, while consumers quietly wonder why their favorite foods just don't taste the same anymore. Even worse, this impact isn't spread evenly. The first and hardest hit are low-income families, the ones who rely on cheap meals, school lunches, and SNAP assistance. When a loaf of bread costs 80 cents more, a family of 5 doesn't just lose money, they lose options. They skip items, settle for less nutritious food, or simply go without. And when even the basics start slipping out of reach, bread pasta crackers, people begin to ask the question, do we still control our own dinner table? Across America's agricultural co-ops, a wave of uncertainty is growing. Grain storage hubs in the Midwest have gone dark, not enough product to justify staying open. Silos that once brimmed with wheat now echo with rusted metal. Trains built for domestic grain delivery have been cut. Local mills have slashed capacity, some now importing flour themselves, something they once saw as unimaginable. And through it all, one phrase keeps popping up: we're buying back our own crop, meaning the US is paying to import something it once produced in abundance. And that's not just economically backwards, it shakes the very foundation of America's belief in self-reliance. Because wheat isn't just a crop, it's a symbol of stability. It's tied to wartime stockpiles, crisis meals, and America's own legacy of food aid around the globe. When we can't even guarantee bread on the table, it's no longer about exports. It's about national identity. Some politicians point to other booming industries to calm the public. But let's be real, no industry can replace the peace of mind that comes from knowing your breakfast was grown right here. And that peace is starting to crumble with every container that docks at the port. Americans don't need another speech. They need real action. A clear strategy to protect what they thought was a given, the right to eat food grown at home. Because when you lose a market, you can fight to get it back. When you lose money, you can work to earn more. But when you lose your people's trust and your standing in the world, you risk losing everything. From America, first to America, last to promise, fading in the fields. Back in 2016, a promise echoed across the American Midwest, one that felt too powerful to ignore. We're going to bring back American farming. It wasn't just a campaign slogan, it was a spark of hope lit during a time when thousands of farmers were drowning in debt, losing their land, and watching decades of trade deals chip away at their livelihoods and faith in the system. And farmers listened, because they didn't need politics. They needed survival. They wanted long-term contracts to return. They wanted the food distribution system reformed. They wanted more labor, not more paperwork. But nearly a decade later, when you look at America's agricultural heartland from Texas to Iowa, Nebraska to Georgia, what remains isn't progress. It's unfinished business, abandoned fields, silent harvesters, for sale signs standing where 3 generations once farmed the land. To be fair, the last administration introduced several policies meant to protect farmers, higher tariffs on imports taxes on foreign agricultural goods, a push for domestic consumption. On paper, it looked like a shield, but in reality, it became a double-edged sword because there was no support system behind it. Take immigration reform, for example, a cornerstone of the border security agenda. But what came with it? A quiet labor crisis right in the middle of America. Tens of thousands of seasonal migrant workers, the backbone of harvesting, packing, and shipping, were deported or left without visa renewals. Fields were abandoned mid-season. Wheat was left unharvested. Fruit rotted on the vines. Vegetables spoiled in the 100-degree heat. No one denies the need for immigration control, but the question remains, who replaced them? No one has an answer. Meanwhile, fuel prices spiked from trade tensions. Fertilizer costs soared due to broken supply chains. And the subsidies. Many farmers say seasonal aid came too late, was buried in red tape, and in many cases wasn't enough to save a bleeding farm. We said America first. But when Japan signs its wheat deal with Canada, when food plants in Iowa start sourcing seeds from France, the feeling across rural America is clear: America is being left behind. Even when agriculture is verbally prioritized, the action never follows. No major investment in food logistics. No real plan to retain skilled farm labor. No long-term vision to hold our export power. The expectations were simple. Protect U.S. farming from unfair foreign competition. Give farmers access to fair markets. Make farmland profitable again. But the reality forces a colder question. What did we hope for, and what are we living with now? From incomplete policies comes another chain reaction, fading faith in the future of farming, especially among the young. Across the Midwest, enrollment in agricultural college programs has dropped sharply in the past 3 years. A student from Purdue's agricultural economics program told a local radio station, "We're taught that American agriculture is the backbone of this country. But every time I go home, my friends are leaving the farm, my parents talk about selling our land, and everything just keeps getting more expensive and uncertain." This isn't just about wheat or export contracts. It's about a generation losing the reason to stay and work the land their families built from the ground up. Here's what most people don't realize: agriculture doesn't run on faith and slogans. It runs on coordination, policy, markets, people, and weather. And when just one linked labor credit or transport breaks, the whole system stalls. And when it stalls, the consequences aren't just in quarterly reports. They show up on every grocery bill and every school lunch, missing key ingredients on every abandoned farm. Meanwhile, another paradox emerges. The world still hails America as the gold standard for modern agriculture. U.S. officials still speak proudly at global food summits. But beneath those speeches, no one's asking, how are American farmers really doing? In North Dakota, small farming co-ops are breaking apart under price pressure. Some are merging, others are declaring bankruptcy. And on social media, pictures of unharvested fields, cows being sold off at a loss, and farms disconnecting electricity to cut bills are appearing more and more, not with outrage, but with quiet resignation. And in that silence, a single question echoes: what did we do wrong? The truth is, they didn't do anything wrong. They believed in a dream that if America stood up for domestic production, they would be the first to benefit. But when the bread on store shelves is made from imported flour, when fruit comes from Chile or Mexico, and the cheapest beef is frozen from Australia, people can't help but ask, what slipped through our fingers? Maybe the failure isn't one specific policy. Maybe it's the lack of consistency, the absence of follow-through. When a promise isn't backed by long-term action, it fades. And when trust fades, people don't fight back. They walk away. The result, a country that still has land, still has machines, still has people willing to work, but no longer knows if it's worth it. A nation shouting revival, but with no roadmap to stay standing. So if we're still wondering why Japan chose Canada, why our bread is made from imports, why farmers are going bankrupt in silence, then we need to remember it's from these small, scattered fractures that once stable systems begin to collapse. We don't need more promises. We need to ask ourselves, what's truly holding America together and what's causing it to fall behind? Canada's rise wasn't luck, it was preparation. If anyone still believes that Canada's wheat deal with Japan was just dumb luck, a win handed to them while the US was in crisis, they haven't been paying attention. Ottawa didn't stumble into success. They built it quietly, steadily over nearly a decade. While America was caught up in debates over tariffs, budget cuts, and immigration crackdowns, Canada was laying the groundwork for a strategy the world is now being forced to reckon with. Back in 2017, Canada's Ministry of Agriculture and Agri-Food launched a long-term initiative called the Protein Industries Supercluster. It focused on biotech innovation automation and upgrading the grain export value chain. Few noticed at the time because the US was still king, but that program helped Saskatchewan and Alberta evolve into the most efficient and sustainable wheat-producing regions in North America. Canada's support for farmers wasn't just about fertilizer discounts or harvester subsidies. They funded research centers to develop drought-tolerant and disease-resistant wheat strains with shorter growing cycles to weather climate unpredictability. They backed startups using AI to forecast yields, optimize planting zones, and streamline distribution. Most crucially, Canada invested in logistics. Billions went into expanding grain rail routes to Vancouver and Prince Rupert. They built modern silos near ports to store and ship grain to Asia, quickly bypassing fragile global supply chains that easily break under stress. Meanwhile, in the US, the supposed grain superpower railways in the Midwest are crumbling. Inland ports are overwhelmed and millions of tons of wheat sit in idle trucks, while farms face severe labor shortages due to rush deportation policies. One side is accelerating, the other spinning its wheels, or worse, rolling backward. In a post-pandemic world, buyers aren't just shopping for grain. They're shopping for stability. Japan didn't turn away from America out of spite. They turned to Canada because it offered what a modern market demands: on-time delivery, consistent quality, stable pricing, and low political risk. That multi-billion-dollar wheat deal didn't fall from the sky. It was the result of deliberate choices, long-term vision, and collective commitment from researchers in Winnipeg to truck drivers in Manitoba, from policymakers in Ottawa to farmers near Calgary. Canada didn't just hope for a win, they engineered one. And what's most jarring for Americans isn't losing the deal, it's realizing we used to be that country. We set the standard for global agriculture. But while we rested on our past success, Canada climbed step by step with quiet precision and relentless consistency. Here's something few people acknowledge: Canada didn't chase the market. They reshaped it. As other nations scrambled to respond to climate shifts, rising freight costs, and global supply chain chaos, Canada quietly built a new export model based on three principles: speed, precision, flexibility. In Manitoba, small and mid-sized businesses were funded to build modular packaging systems tailored to the import specs of different countries. In Quebec, they developed blockchain-based tracking systems for every wheat container, giving buyers in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan exact data on planting location, harvest date, and quality metrics. For a global-facing agricultural system, these aren't luxuries, they're requirements. And the US-American farmers are still working hard, still eager to lead, but they haven't been given the tools to compete. There's no new infrastructure, no incentives for ag tech innovation, no clear effort to rebuild trust with global customers. The result: Canada, once the backup plan, is now Plan A. Not just for Japan, but for South Korea and Indonesia too. According to Q1 2025 data from the OECD, wheat imports from Canada to Asia rose 41%. US wheat dropped over 36%, the steepest decline in 2 decades. So when Americans ask, why aren't we the top choice anymore? Maybe it's time we admit no one stole our spot. We let go of it. We once led the world in agricultural support programs, in crop science, in harvesting and storage technology. But years of inconsistent policy, delayed infrastructure upgrades, and the erosion of our labor base have made it impossible for American farmers to keep holding the global food leadership banner we once waved so proudly. Now imagine this. What if tomorrow another major nation signs a long-term wheat contract with Canada? What if Canada continues expanding into corn, soy, and livestock? Then who will need the millions of abandoned acres in Kansas, Nebraska, or Texas? And if one day your entire breakfast, from the bread to the eggs to the sausage, depends on ingredients grown in another country, will you still feel like you live in a nation with food sovereignty? Canada didn't rush ahead. They didn't shout. They simply stayed the course. And in the end, the results spoke louder than any speech. Because in the global agriculture game, it's not the loudest player who wins. It's the one who never stopped moving forward. When the right to eat is no longer a guarantee for Americans. You can lose a job, lose a vacation, even lose the car you love, but there's one thing you can't afford to lose, not without everything around you falling apart. That's the right to eat, the most basic right of any citizen in a free, strong nation. And yet today, that right is shaking. Not because of a lack of money, not because Americans are unwilling to work, but because right here on US soil, we're no longer sure how long we can still feed ourselves. Look around. From the wheat fields of Kansas to the peach farms of Georgia, from shuttered flour mills in Iowa to the shrinking produce routes in California, every link in the chain is under strain. Some of it stems from outdated policies, some from underinvestment, but the rest, and perhaps the most dangerous part, comes from a fading belief that America will always be the land of food abundance. Today, every loaf of bread you pick up might be made from Canadian flour. Every tomato in your salad might come from Mexico. Every cut of beef flash frozen and shipped across oceans might originate from a foreign plant. Bit by bit, your meal is no longer decided by the American farmer, but by someone whose name you'll never know from a country that doesn't share your flag. You might ask, so what? As long as we still have food, does it matter where it comes from? But that's exactly the trap. When dependence forms, choice disappears. Imagine the day when Canada prioritizes exports to Japan over shipments to the US, when Mexico halts produce exports due to drought, when rising fuel prices push foreign food out of reach. What will you do when your local store shelves are bare? When your favorite cereal box is nowhere to be found? When your child asks why there's no sandwich for lunch and you don't have an answer? That's not some distant dystopia. It's already in motion. According to the USDA's June 2025 report, US wheat reserves have hit their lowest point since 1973. At the same time, farmland abandonment is rising sharply in states that were once agricultural strongholds, with no sign of recovery in the next 12 months. The truth is, we're entering an era where the right to eat doesn't come from the land you live on, but from trade contracts your country no longer controls. And what's more worrying, Americans aren't ready for this. Not everyone grows vegetables in their backyard. Not every town has a food reserve, and not every family can adapt when food prices spike overnight. We've grown used to convenience, used to cheap food, used to getting anything we want with a few clicks. But the world doesn't work that way anymore. And if the US doesn't act, doesn't plan, doesn't rebuild its food system, doesn't stand by its farmers, then we're trading away our freedom for a foreign-labeled dinner. We still have time, but not much. And the question is no longer, can we fix it? It's, will you stand by, or will you fight for the right to eat? A right that every American deserves, and one that should never be left to chance. Losing a contract isn't just a trade issue. It's a wake-up call. Americans are slowly losing control over what's on their own table. If today we're importing wheat, what's stopping tomorrow from being milk beef or vegetables? So we ask you, what do you think is happening to America? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't just a farmer's issue. It's a question about the future of an entire nation. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown of the facts that shape your life.